you for tuning in to the Island Treasures podcast. We value the insights shared by our guests and hosts, but it's important to note that their personal experiences are intended to inform and encourage, and not to replace professional, legal, or medical advice. With that, we are ready for today's exciting episode. Hello and welcome to Island Treasures podcast. We're entering a new season with a new direction. For years, we've walked alongside caregivers in the midst of their caregiving journey, offering resources, support, encouragement, and community. Now, as we shift our focus, we'll be exploring what comes after caregiving. I'm your host, Allison Van Schie, inviting you into conversations with former caregivers. Each episode features honest reflections on what comes next, stories of resilience, renewal, and rediscovery. And since the podcast comes to you from Vancouver Island in Canada, you'll hear the occasional episode that explores a different kind of treasure, local places and experiences that make the island itself something special. Whether you're navigating life after caregiving or simply curious about the treasures held within Vancouver Island, I'm glad you're here. Let's explore new treasures together. My guest today is an accomplished writer, editor, and former award-winning journalist. After her father passed away from Alzheimer's disease, she became passionate about contributing to the Alzheimer's community. In this episode, you'll hear about several of the efforts she has undertaken, including the children's book she wrote, which combines a heartfelt story about Alzheimer's disease with a collection of intergenerational activities. She explains it best, so join me now as I welcome Carol Steinberg to the podcast. So I'm here today with Carol Steinberg, and I'm so happy to have her joining me. So Carol, let's get started. You reached out to me because you'd written a book and you wanted to share that book with me. And it's a book that was written about Alzheimer's with a children's perspective. First of all, let's get to know you a little bit before we dive right into that. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Allison.
Like I said, I'm really happy about having you here. So tell me a little bit about your background and the Alzheimer's connection.
Absolutely. So my main career was a journalist. I was a freelance journalist for many years. I wrote for major publications, contributing to New York Times, Success Magazine, other publications, and was very happy in that life as a freelancer because it enabled me to raise my daughters at the same time. My dad passed away from Alzheimer's disease in 1997. And that was sort of a pivotal moment for me. A few years later, I happened to come across an ad for a local Alzheimer's organization where I live that was looking for someone to do public relations and development. And I felt that was really my background. Could transfer the skills from journalism right to that. But moreover, I felt that it was sort of a calling, a message from my dad to give back.
Yeah.
In fact, when I went for the interview and was hired on the spot, when I got back to my car, there was a feather on the floor, and my father always wore feathers in his cap. And I've seen feathers at very, very meaningful moments in my life. So I knew I should accept this job. I knew he was telling me give back. The local organization that I worked for, ultimately, we morphed into a national organization, and I was an executive there for more than 15 years. So I got the opportunity to meet so many families, to interview so many people, and it was extremely fulfilling. Then took a few years off, worked for other nonprofits, And luckily came full circle back to my passion of being in the Alzheimer's world by writing a bi-monthly newsletter for an organization called Voices of Alzheimer's.
Very good.
As well, my children's book, which is about Alzheimer's disease, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly, was published last year. And the reason
Congratulations.
I reached out to you, Allison, is I want as many families as possible to know about this book because I think it's so important for families to talk to their kids or their grandkids about the disease before it's too late.
Mhm. Yes. So your father, how long was he diagnosed or living with Alzheimer's then?
We think that he was living with Alzheimer's about 10 years, but diagnosis took a while. We're also talking nearly 30 years ago when the Alzheimer's world was very, very different than it is today. Doctors weren't as aware. There really weren't medications available like there are today. So I would say he lived with it probably 10 years, and the progression of it really declining was about 4 years.
Mhm. And as we both know, that's a very tough disease. Yeah, I'm sorry that you lost him and that he had that, but you learned so much and you found your place and how to amplify the voice and to also teach and to share your experience for children. And um, yeah, all these amazing things have come together in the culmination of not only the book, but of where you are now and how you are helping other people.
I think the transition in career, because it was in effect a midlife career change, was, for lack of better words, a meant to be. Because when I was a journalist, I felt that I was always learning new things because all my stories were so different. And I felt that I was educating people. But it's very different when you're educating people about a disease that really impacts all family members. So journalism was a little selfish in a way, I think, and the transition to this was less selfish.
Interesting. But the journalism background really put you in a good place to be doing what you're doing that is less selfish, to use your words. But you're paying it forward in a way. You're, yeah, being selfless. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about caregiving. Now, I know you shared with me earlier before we started this podcast that you don't consider yourself the caregiver, but your mom was the primary caregiver. But you did witness a lot as your mom was caregiving. So, can you share a little bit of your observations as the witnessing caregiver, let's say?
My parents lived in Florida. I and my siblings lived in New York. So it was definitely a long distance relationship. What I watched is the most selfless woman care for my dad. So committed, never saying a bad word or feeling bad for herself that this was her lot in life. And my parents were older when they had us. So we're not talking about a young person taking care of another younger person. They were well on in their years, but thankfully my mom was healthy. The role that I played and my siblings played was going down to see them
Mhm.
periodically, which we would have done anyway, myself taking my children along with me to see their grandparents. I think the role we also played, or I recall that I played, was being a listening ear for my mom. Going down if, let's say, my mom needed some kind of health procedure, or my dad had to go into the hospital, so they weren't alone. And the other role we played was, and I think this is true of a lot of long distance caregivers, is picking up on each of our strengths. So we each played our role.
And you were all on the same page when it came to what is needed for your folks.
We were all on the same page because we were brought up as family is everything.
Mm.
And that's the message I believe I've instilled in my two daughters. And Proof of that is they bought houses right across the street from each other.
Lucky.
So my four grandchildren are being brought up as siblings, really, rather than as
Wow.
cousins.
What you're describing, family is everything to your family, and that includes children. Maybe that's part of the impetus behind writing the book that you wanted to write, because you wanted to help children to know more about this terrible disease. So let's talk a little bit about the book.
I wrote the first draft of Come Grandpa Meow, not with that name,
Hmm.
the week that my father passed away. My mother was up in New York. She was staying with me, as she did very often, and especially after my dad passed. And the words just poured out of me. I'm not a children's book author by any means. I'm not a fiction writer by any means. My career was journalism. I was very intent on getting all the facts right. So it was a very big departure for me. But the reason it poured out of me was, one, I think it was a creative outlet for me as a writer to express my grief. And also, it was based on my family's story, which I wanted to tell. The original draft of this book was just the children's story, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly, again with a different title. Over the years, as I entered the Alzheimer's world and learned so much more about the disease, it became even more important to see this book get published. And I would go back to it periodically in the middle of a very intense career while raising a family. And I would go back to it from time to time and tweak it, whether it was a word or a page. And I was so glad I did, because I saw how little I knew about Alzheimer's really when my dad had the disease. There were so many things that I would have been mortified if that book had been published 30 years ago.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, I decided that I really needed this book to share with other people. And I found a great artist, Chelsea Cooper, who understood that I really wanted real people illustrated in this book, to have a watercolor type tone. I didn't want it to be bears or giraffes, which I know resonate with kids, but I wanted it to be a real family because it's reality. This is the disease.
Yeah.
So the book is based on my family's experience, but I think it resonates, could be any family.
Wow.
What I added to the book was a part two,
Oh.
intergenerational activities, because I really feel that children need to understand the disease in age-appropriate language, which is what the story does, but then they need to know how to foster the bond with their loved one. So for me, it answers the question, we know about the disease, but now what?
Yeah.
How do we interact with our loved one? And it's giving ideas to do that, which I wish I had had with my young kids when my father had the disease.
Brilliant. Yeah, because they still want a relationship with him. He still needs a relationship with them, and yet he's different now.
And I wish I knew how to relate better with my dad then.
Yeah. So the intergenerational activities can apply to adults as well, obviously. So before we proceed, could you tell me a little bit about the title you chose?
A little strange, right?
It's, I don't think I've heard of it before.
My father was a very interesting man, and he would always kid around. He would kid around with us, he would kid around with his nieces and nephews, almost to the point of making them cry because they didn't know he was joking.
Hmm.
And way before he got sick, he would always make cat noises. Meow, meow. You'd know it was my father. So come Grandpa Meow. Not that the kids ever called him Grandpa Meow. They called him Grandpa Michael, his name. But I felt it was sort of a tribute to my dad. Come Grandpa Meow, let's fly. The cover of the book is a little girl, the main character, Linny, on a swing. And that's where the let's fly comes in. My dad used to sing a song to us when he would push us on the swing in the park in Brooklyn where we grew up.
Mm.
And he would then sing the same song to his five granddaughters
Mm.
when he would push them on the swing. I now have sung the song to my four grandchildren over the years. They know the song by heart. They could sing it. It's not Let's Fly, but it's similar. So that's where it comes in. Plus, it's the way Linny, the main character in the book, ends up interacting in a new way with her grandfather, coming full circle.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
That tugged at my heart. How's it doing?
It's available on Amazon.
Okay.
It has gotten 5-star reviews. What I'm most proud of is the anecdotes I hear from people who say that it's helpful. In fact, a few months back, I was interviewing someone for Voices of Alzheimer's, the organization that I write the newsletter for, and he has young children. His mom has Alzheimer's disease, and I sent him the book and I said to him, I honestly want to know
Mm.
if you read it to your kids, is it helpful?
Mm.
Because I want it to be.
Yeah.
And he wrote back and he said, not only was it helpful, but it brought tears to his eyes.
Oh.
You see that when I talk about it, I'm on the verge of tears.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, before I published it, I sent it to experts because I know so many people in the Alzheimer's world, the top experts, people like Teepa Snow, who is a name so well known in the caregiving community. She gave me a testimonial on the back of the book.
Beautiful.
A neurologist, Daniel Potts, gave me
Yeah.
a testimonial. And I think most importantly, Rebecca Chop, who has Alzheimer's, who has written her own book, who has had a very prestigious career as a chancellor of several universities, told me that it was right on target.
Wow.
So to hear words and testimonials like stigma busting, it should be in everyone's library, reality, brings the conversation to life, a conversation starter, that to me is telling me that the book is on target.
Yep. You hit the mark. Well done. So tell me a little bit more about the intergenerational activities, if you wouldn't mind even sharing one or two.
So as I said, the intergenerational activities, the intent there is really to find new ways to foster a bond between a child and a loved one, and also an adult caregiver, because they often don't know ways to interact. So I present an introduction that has steps on how to interact. So you could think of your own activities and then give a few how-to examples, sort of steps like a recipe, music, cooking, gardening, really building on themes that are in the book itself. There's a gardening aspect to the book. There's a music aspect to the book. As I said, the song, the title of the book is based on a song. So it's building on those themes. And the reason I really wanted to do this is because there's so many studies that show the value of creative activities and how it can help someone with the disease. It could help with reminiscence. It could help reduce isolation. It helps with socialization. And also, there's so many studies that show how intergenerational activities can help young children and teenagers. It can help foster empathy. It could help build self-confidence. It helps with socialization. And for the caregiver, the adult coming into this, we all know how important socialization is for a care partner. They lose so much of themselves. They're living in isolation. They've lost such an important relationship with a loved one. So this is finding new ways to interact.
I love that because relationship is so important. And I love the intergenerational component. And when I worked in nursing homes, I would see the benefits of bringing a kindergarten class into the activities that are happening in the nursing home. It's just, it brings life, it brings joy, but it also removes stigma. And children are not afraid of older people. And until they're exposed, they might be.
I'm so glad you used the word stigma because that's another reason why I feel books like this is so important. Because we know that in the Alzheimer's community, survey after survey has shown that people with the disease feel stigmatized, they feel discrimination. The percentages are enormous. One study showed 88% of people with the disease feel stigmatized. So, books like this explaining the disease to children, what is happening to a loved one, can help reduce stigma. It also, as you said, helps reduce fear,
Mm,
helps reduce confusion,
yeah.
and fosters the bonds. And you mentioned about going into nursing homes. One of my grandchildren, my 6-year-old granddaughter, through her Girl Scout troop a
Oh.
few weeks ago, went into an assisted living facility and they sang songs. And that
Mhm.
just touched me because that's what's needed.
Yep. Yep. It brings joy and it brings life. It brings an energy that may be lacking. And people, even though they may be limited in their mobility, they may be reliant on a wheelchair for their transportation or their mode of transportation, they're still alive inside, and this just feeds them, and it just brings that bubbling up, and it's so important just to see that interaction and see the eyes sparkle again when children walk into the central room in the nursing home was always joyful. And yeah, it just lifted. There was a lifting of spirit. It just felt so good. So I'm so glad that your granddaughter, as a brownie, got to go in and sing. And
As a daisy, not even a brownie yet.
oh, wow. Wow. So she's going to grow up and, like feel that that's a comfort place for her. And especially with the books and had the song sung to her. And
Well, it's interesting. My grandchildren have not read this book, and that's very intentional on my part. The reason being, if you want me to explain it,
I
is
do.
I unveiled this book to my two daughters and their husbands before it was published. They knew I had written this book a long time ago. In fact, they had read some old drafts of it. They didn't know I was working on it with an illustrator. I wanted it to be a surprise.
Mm.
I wanted to see their real reaction to it. So I unveiled it like you'd unveil a painting. It was covered with a sheet, the cover of the book. I was watching their faces as they read it. My grandchildren were off in another room intentionally. The reason they haven't, they know, the grandchildren know I have written this book. They've seen the cover. One of them did ask me to read it to them recently, and I quickly diverted her attention to something else because
Mm.
she's the youngest of the bunch, and I didn't want to read this to a 4.5-year-old. I don't want them to have Alzheimer's in their head right now. It's not relevant.
Yeah.
I feel this book is relevant
Mm.
when a loved one has the disease. At some point, maybe I'll read it to the kids, but I don't want them to look at me and be scared. Grandma could get Alzheimer's disease. Grandma might not recognize who I am. I want to live with them in the moment now
Yeah.
to get the joy that I get out of them every time I see them. Hopefully, they get the joy out of me. And if, heaven forbid, the day comes, my kids have this book to read to them.
Oh, that makes complete sense and very wise to not expose them at a point where they don't need to be exposed.
Try to be a wise grandma once in a while.
Hey, well done. Yeah. But yeah, that makes sense. So let's move forward. And would you mind sharing one of the intergenerational activities with me and the listeners?
I start off each activity with an explanation of why it works. I think people need to know and understand why a certain activity will resonate with someone with the disease. So, the why it works, for example, for music, let's take that as an example, again, because that's such a big theme in this book. Music responses are deep rooted in past experiences. People link music to important events and various emotions. In addition, the structure and rhythm of music evoke familiarity and comfort. Research shows that so-called musical memory remains longer than any other memories, even when people with Alzheimer's are rapidly declining. And musical activities may help improve memory and behavioral and psychological symptoms. And I will say I saw that with my dad because he did sing or hum until the near end. Then I present how music works, how you can do a music activity in steps like a recipe. So step one, go back in time. And I'll just read part of this. Look for song lyrics that evoke positive associations and the most potential for engagement. Sing songs from a person's childhood, such as folk songs, songs from a person's culture, or a person's native language. So, for example, Come Grandpa Meow, the familiar song that Grandpa used to sing to Linny, generates recognition when Linny sings it back to Grandpa. Step two, use props. Pull out song sheets, a karaoke player, or a sing-along video to assist with lyrics. Step three, prevent overstimulation and distractions. When you strike up the band, strike out competing noises, such as TV. Try headphones to maximize results. Step four, move it. Encourage movement with a rhythm, such as clapping, toe tapping, or dancing. Step five, pump up the beat. Bring out tambourines, triangles, bells, and drums, which is very common in long-term care facilities.
Yep.
The next step, be happy or sad. Use facial expressions, body movements, or other physical cues to communicate feelings or act out lyrics. And lastly, change the tune. As Alzheimer's progresses into the later stages, sing or hum as a person is walking to improve gait. Use familiar, relaxing music to enhance mood.
All tailored to the person with Alzheimer's. And like, I love that you put culture in there.
Well, we always hear all the time that spiritual songs have been so familiar to the person with the disease, that's what's likely to come back. Childhood poems are likely to come back. That's why poetry therapy is so impactful with people with the disease as well.
Yep. Things that they memorize, things that they took to their core. Yeah. I remember when my mom was dying, I walked into her hospital room, and we were from England. I don't have the English accent, but she had also adopted a Canadian accent. But when I walked into the room, she said, "It's Alison." And it was very English, the way she said it. And that was what was in her core. And yeah.
That's a nice memory for you.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, like when I worked in the nursing home, there was a lady, she had advanced dementia, and she sat at the piano and she could still play the piano, but she couldn't talk to us. She couldn't tell you what she was doing, but she could still tickle the ivories. And
I hear stories like that all the time. I also hear stories that people sometimes initiate new types of activities despite having the disease. So, for example, I mentioned before Daniel Potts, a neurologist who is so well known in the Alzheimer's world. His dad developed a love for artwork and painted all these beautiful pictures. Danny has put them into a book, and he talks about it all the time. He posts them so many times on social media. And as he says, it was just the exact opposite of what his father, who had such rough hands as a carpenter, he would never have thought of painting, and he became a painter as Alzheimer's disease set in.
yeah, we want to be open to new opportunities. And, that's where day programs can sometimes be of value. Like often there's a resistance. I don't want to go to a day program. It's just a bunch of old people, whatever. But then they get there and they're doing different activities, and one might resonate with them in a way that they never expected. And often I hear that people, once they get over that resistance and go, and then they formulate their friends, they get a social feeling there, and it's a positive in the day programs as well. But yeah, I mean, we're all a little bit resistant to change.
Day programs and support groups are the most valuable resource, I believe, for people with the disease and care partners. And when you talk about the day programs, as you did, overcoming resistance to them, they're so important not only for the person with the disease, but also for the care partner, because that does give them the respite they need. It helps them not only take care of the practical things they need to take care of, but it can help so much with self-care and help them retain parts of their identity that get lost when they're caregiving. I remember with my mother, and again, we're talking so long ago when support groups weren't that well known, or there weren't that many. Now there's so many, especially all the ones online since COVID. My mom was so resistant to the idea of a support group. We could never get her to go to one. She was a very private person. There was no way she was talking about anything in a support group. And that's one of the first things I tell care partners when I talk to them, is that they need to have some kind of emotional release. They get so much value from talking to other care partners, whether it's tips or just new friendships, things like that. But I could see the resistance there. It's the same way that I'm resistant to go to a group activity. It takes a lot to get yourself out there and to meet new people.
Yeah, yeah. And out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
Support groups are huge. I had a thriving support group for 6 years. It was amazing. And I say that caregivers talk their own language. And if you've got a new caregiver or a person that's just starting to dip their toe into the role of caregiver, and they've got, let's say, 10 or 12 people that are sitting there that have all been there already, just helping them along, hopefully not scaring them too much of what's to come, but helping them along, holding their hands, and just easing them into the role that is foreign and so unprepared for in so many cases. So yeah, support groups are so valuable.
And they're valuable even after a person with the disease passes away. I know on Long Island, for example, an Alzheimer's organization recently started a group for caregivers in transition because they felt the support group that they had attended was so valuable all along, and they made these friendships. And afterwards, it was sort of like a now what for them.
Yeah. That now what is why I'm so glad that you're here, because the transition from when the caregiving role ends to life after caregiving is what the podcast is now focusing on. It's the now what, it's how to deal with that transition. And when I read the words now what in your bio, I thought, yeah, this is good. This is a good fit. But now what? You experienced the grief and you found a way to process your grief through the creative outlet of your writing. But other people may need that support group to have that outlet, or may go hiking, or may just need to scream, or whatever. Like, everybody's outlet might be different, but it's nice to hear other people's experiences. And that's what this podcast is now trying to do.
For my mom, her outlet was really the family. Because my father was no longer there, she gained, if you want one positive aspect of this whole horrible disease, is my mom gained the ability to travel up to New York more frequently to see her granddaughters and to see us and to stay with us and to start traveling again and to see her sisters and to rejoin organizations that she couldn't go to because she was caring for my dad. So I think in a way, it was a light for her afterwards, as much as obviously she didn't want my father to have this disease. She didn't want my father to pass away. But there was sort of a light at the end of this tunnel, and that was the family is everything.
Yeah. And she found a new freedom with the support of her family. Like, it was comfort for her to have her family.
I think so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
The fact that your family is so involved in family as a value, that's a testament to your mom and your dad.
In fact, to share something personal, my mom's tombstone says family is everything.
Beautiful. Yeah, you can't take that lightly.
It's rare that I share anything personal. I've always been, I guess because of my corporate life, I've always been a very private person, very. Um, what's really drawn me out though is really doing these interviews for Voices of Alzheimer's when I talk to people who have the disease or I talk to care partners. It's so helpful to draw people out when I could share some of myself. So I find that I'm often relaying my father's story and my mother's story as a care partner, or talking about Come Grandpa Meow. It just goes more and more into these conversations, and I learn more about the people while they're learning a little bit about me.
Yeah. I love that it builds the trust. It gains momentum because stories need to be shared and venting needs to take place. And venting doesn't always have to be ugly. It can just be sharing your story, sharing your concerns, sharing your feelings, and it can be soft.
But the ugly side of venting is so important too for care partners because the disease can last for years, up to 20 years, and the progression is devastating. My father ended up in a wheelchair. He lost his balance. He couldn't walk anymore. You watch different body parts shut down. You watch your memory fade more and more every day. It is a horrific disease. There is no sugarcoating it.
No, no, that's where when I made my comment about the support groups, we had one caregiver who came to the group early on in their caregiving journey. And the seasoned caregivers in the group were so protective, not wanting to overwhelm him with what was yet to come because it's going to happen and it is happening, And you're right, no sugarcoating.
But at the same time, I interview so many people with the disease who are living with joy. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true. Maybe it's because the people that I interview with the disease are still in the early stages. They're making most of their time. So they're traveling and they're pursuing hobbies and they're seeing their family and they're writing books. So I love that I get to see some of the positive side of this disease too, rather than just dwell on the negative.
But you are giving a forum for people to share their voice, to share their story. And I love that. So bring on the joy, like bring on the joy. But you have a great forum. I think that sounds lovely. That Voices of Alzheimer's.
Voices of Alzheimer's is a nonprofit advocacy organization. It was founded a few years ago by people with the disease who really felt there needed to be a voice for people to share their stories, as well as to advocate for more services and supports. So I know you're in Canada, but in the US, for example, Voices of Alzheimer's, they just got a big win. They got a US representative to introduce legislation to eliminate the waiting period for people with young onset Alzheimer's disease to get Medicare benefits. That's a huge win if it
Yeah.
comes to pass. Young onset Alzheimer's is even doubly devastating, I would say, because we're talking about people in their 30s to 60s, prime of their lives, peak of their earnings potential,
Right.
most likely with young children whose whole lives are disrupted. They have to leave their jobs, they lose their health care benefits, family dynamics change. And that's where Voices of Alzheimer's really has been helping by sharing stories, providing education, advocating for change for people with the disease and for care partners.
That's awesome. So is Voices for Alzheimer's as a nonprofit, is it nationwide?
The focus is the US, but certainly anyone in any part of the world can become a member. Membership costs a mere $10, and the resources are tremendous. it gains access to the newsletter that I write every other month. And what is valuable about the newsletter is it's not only sharing the stories, there's a strong educational component to it. Each personal profile is linked to a feature story that has something in common. So, for example, if I was talking to an individual with young onset, the main story might be young onset. If I'm talking to somebody who, as I said, found the positive in this disease, who's traveling the world and doing all that, the feature story was about how to travel with someone who has Alzheimer's disease, talking about new programs like the Sunflower program that
Mhm.
identifies someone with the disease.
Yep, we use that. That's so
It's a
cool.
great program.
Yeah, it is a very good program. I love that you're a journalist and that you do this research when you're putting stories together and you're linking things together, and you are educating and you're motivating and you're inspiring, and it's beautiful. And I'm
And it
so
helps
glad.
me learn still.
Well, this is good because we should never stop learning. Like,
I
and it
agree.
keeps our brains active. And meeting you has been amazing. I'm very
Thank you.
excited. Yeah, I'm very excited to read your story, your book. Thank you for sharing the intergenerational activities and how they can be tailored to each family, each unique situation. And yeah,
It's been my
this is,
pleasure, Allison.
yeah, it's been great. Is there a way folks can reach you or find your book?
I'd love if you could put the link. So, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly is available on Amazon. Type in the title of the book, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly, and it comes up under children's books and under Alzheimer's books. I'm on LinkedIn, Carol Steinberg, and I welcome people who want to share their stories to contact me
Awesome.
because we need to share more.
Yep, we do. And I'm so grateful that we shared today. This has been lovely.
I love talking about the book because I love being able to talk about my parents.
Yeah. And that's a lovely sentiment to end on. Thanks, Carol. I'm so grateful that Carol was able to talk about her parents with us today. Moving forward after caregiving, whether hands-on or long distance, or even supporting a primary caregiver, all means that when our loved one passes, the caregiver will face a period of transition, loss, and adjustment. Talking about our loved ones when they are no longer with us, saying their names and sharing their stories are powerful ways we can keep them close and alive in our hearts. For Carol, after her dad died, she wrote the first draft of her book, and the words just poured out of her in creative release of her grief. Now her book, Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly, is a highly regarded resource for families with children who are adjusting to the changes brought about by a loved one living with Alzheimer's disease. Processing grief, sharing knowledge of the disease, and imparting helpful lessons learned from one's experience are necessary activities moving forward after caregiving. If you'd like to share your story with Carol, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. If you'd like to have a copy of her book, it's available on Amazon. Thank you for tuning in today, and to Carol Steinberg, thank you for sharing your story and for talking about Come Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with your friends, especially those navigating life after caregiving or navigating through caregiving with a family member who's living with Alzheimer's disease. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Island Treasures podcast. See you next episode.